The Supermarine Spitfire needs no introduction, yet it commands one all the same. It's the aircraft synonymous with British resolve in World War II, renowned for its elegant elliptical wings, unmistakable roar, and fierce effectiveness in combat. Arguably one of the greatest aviation designs in history, the Spitfire has inspired countless stories, books, documentaries, and childhood dreams. Let's dive straight into the story of how this remarkable fighter came to be, how it dominated the skies, and what ultimately became of this legendary warbird. The story of the Supermarine Spitfire begins in the 1930s, a turbulent period marked by rapid advancements in aeronautical engineering and a looming sense of global conflict. Military planners across Europe realized that the next war, if it came, would be dominated by air power. Nations clamored to build faster, stronger, and more agile fighters in hopes of gaining the upper hand. The seeds for the Spitfire were sown in Britain's move toward modernizing its Royal Air Force, or RAF. In the aftermath of World War I, the RAF recognized the need to develop new fighters that were capable of intercepting bombers at higher altitudes and performing a variety of tasks, from escort missions to ground support. At the time, British design teams were experimenting with monoplane configurations, retractable landing gear, variable pitch propellers, and all-metal construction. These technologies signaled a departure from the old ways, where fabric-covered biplanes ruled the sky. Supermarine, a company founded in 1913 that initially specialized in seaplanes, believed that it had something unique to offer. Although the notion of a seaplane manufacturer designing a cutting-edge fighter might have seemed far-fetched, Supermarine's strong background in aerodynamic efficiency made it stand out. Its success in the Schneider Trophy races, where it fielded some of the fastest racing seaplanes in the world, earned the company a reputation for performance-focused innovation. By the early 1930s, the British Air Ministry wanted a fast fighter that could surpass existing aircraft in speed, climb rate, and maneuverability. There was little margin for error. Other countries were also pouring resources into new fighters, including Germany's Messerschmitt Bf 109, which would become the Spitfire's arch-enemy in the skies over Europe. But nonetheless, Britain needed a homegrown solution, and fast. The project that would eventually become the Spitfire had modest origins as Type 300. It began as a private venture by Supermarine, but with the RAF's urgent interest, the design rapidly evolved. The team poured in countless hours of research and development, focusing on how to craft a fighter that combined aerodynamic finesse with robust firepower. While the Hurricane was already on the horizon from Hawker, Supermarine's team felt certain that their design could push the envelope even further. The genesis was rocky. Aviation materials were improving, but still faced limitations. Stressed skin aluminum required careful structural design. Armament demands from the Air Ministry changed more than once. Engineers wrestled with how to balance weight, firepower, and speed without sacrificing the plane's structural integrity. Yet, through this period of refinement, a legend was quietly taking shape. The aircraft that emerged would be fast, agile, and easily recognizable among the swirl of propellers soon to fill the skies. When the first prototype took flight in 1936, few could have predicted the Spitfire's future status as a national symbol. But the seeds were planted, and that day marked the debut of an aircraft that would eventually become a linchpin in Britain's fight for survival. Even from the early days, the Spitfire exhibited the hallmark qualities that made it iconic: that futuristic shape, strong performance, and an intangible aura of greatness. Now, the primary visionary behind the Spitfire was Reginald Joseph Mitchell, affectionately known as R.J. Mitchell. Born in 1895, Mitchell had shown a knack for designing aircraft that combined speed and grace. He joined Supermarine in 1917 and immersed himself in creating revolutionary seaplane racers for the prestigious Schneider Trophy competitions. His designs dominated the event, garnering international prestige for both him and the company. That experience became the bedrock upon which he would build the Spitfire. Mitchell believed that performance was paramount, and he advocated for pushing the boundaries of aerodynamics. He also understood that while raw speed was crucial, an aircraft used in combat must be more than a racing machine. It needed durability, maneuverability, and reliable armament. These competing priorities fueled Mitchell's creativity, allowing him to marry sleek aerodynamic lines with practical fighter requirements. His health was failing by the mid-1930s, yet his unwavering dedication to the Type 300 design never wavered. Even as he battled cancer, he continued overseeing revisions and improvements. Mitchell's commitment set a standard of excellence that permeated the entire Supermarine team. Engineers and draftsmen worked under constant pressure to meet the RAF's demands for greater firepower, fuel capacity, and altitude performance. They refined the elliptical wing to achieve the best possible aerodynamics, ensuring a balanced lift-to-drag ratio that made the plane incredibly nimble. Although R.J. Mitchell unfortunately passed away in 1937 before witnessing the Spitfire become a household name, his influence remained at the heart of its evolution. Others, like Joseph Smith, took up the mantle. Smith had been Mitchell's right-hand man, and he carried forward Mitchell's ethos of relentless pursuit of innovation. Under Smith's direction, the Spitfire's design went through numerous incremental upgrades, each introducing refinements that would prove critical in actual combat conditions. The entire Supermarine workforce also deserves immense credit. The company, small compared to giants like Hawker or Vickers, fostered a spirit of camaraderie. Driven by patriotism and a profound belief in their product, they worked day and night to transform Mitchell's drawings into a flying reality. This collaborative mindset remained intact through production expansions, battlefield adaptations, and the introduction of new variants. When we celebrate the Spitfire, we celebrate the legacy of R.J. Mitchell, Joseph Smith, and all those unsung heroes whose relentless effort brought this aircraft from blueprint to the battlefield. One of the Spitfire's major claims to fame was its sophisticated aerodynamic profile. In an era where drag reduction and wing loading were still nascent sciences, Supermarine's engineers led the charge. The elliptical wing, easily spotted by its curved leading and trailing edges, became the aircraft's most distinguishing feature. This shape was not merely for aesthetics. It produced less induced drag at higher speeds, allowing the Spitfire to gain a crucial edge in climb rate and top speed over many of its contemporaries. The elliptical platform made the wing structurally efficient. It would house multiple 303 Browning machine guns while maintaining a thin cross-section, which further reduced drag. Some might argue that a simpler wing shape could have been nearly as effective, but the elliptical design afforded a near-perfect distribution of lift, especially during those tight turns and dogfights. This advantage often spelled the difference between life and death in aerial combat. Alongside the wing, the engine was integral to the Spitfire's success. Early models featured Rolls-Royce's Merlin engine. The Merlin, known for its reliability and high power-to-weight ratio, was arguably the best piston engine of its day. It incorporated cutting-edge technology, such as a pressurized cooling system and an innovative two-stage supercharger in later variants. This allowed the Spitfire to maintain excellent performance even at higher altitudes, vital for intercepting enemy bombers. In tandem, the airframe design and the Rolls-Royce engine made a formidable duo. The Spitfire could climb to combat altitudes with striking speed, pivot into agile turns thanks to its well-balanced control surfaces, and it could outrun or outmaneuver many adversaries. Its elliptical wings offered pilots a stable gun platform, which was essential for accurate shooting. In air combat, a fraction of a second can determine the outcome, and having such a refined aerodynamic package gave British pilots that extra fraction. The synergy between aerodynamic finesse and engine power also influenced the Spitfire's future evolution. As Rolls-Royce refined its engines, progressing through different iterations of the Merlin and eventually to the Griffin, Supermarine matched those enhancements with improvements to the airframe. This made the Spitfire an adaptable platform. Even as enemy aircraft advanced, the Spitfire could keep pace or surpass them. Now, when people think Spitfire, they immediately picture the elliptical wings. Though this was not the only elliptical-winged aircraft ever produced, no plane wielded that shape to better effect in World War II. The elliptical geometry, described by many as a bird-like grace, was more than just visually striking. It distributed lift evenly across the wingspan, reducing the wingtip's tendency to stall before the wing roots. Now, this gave the Spitfire more predictable handling at lower speeds, a boon for takeoff and landing, especially on hastily constructed airfields. Beneath the wings lay other critical features. The landing gear was relatively wide set compared to certain contemporaries, which improved ground handling. The undercarriage also retracted inward, further enhancing aerodynamic cleanliness. Each Spitfire wing was designed to accommodate different armament configurations as the war progressed, anything from 8.303 machine guns in early marks to cannons and even small bombs in later versions. The cockpit was another highlight. The Spitfire offered good visibility, especially in later marks that featured a bubble canopy. British pilots often praised the plane's comfortable ergonomics, which might sound a bit odd given the cramped quarters typical of World War II fighters. Comfortable? It's probably a relative term. this was still a single-seat cockpit in the 1940s. Yet the intuitive layout of instruments and controls allowed pilots to focus on combat rather than fussing with panel arrangements. Moving to the engine, the Rolls-Royce Merlin was the beating heart of the early and mid-war Spitfires. It was a liquid-cooled V12 with overhead camshafts and optimized combustion. Early Merlins, like the Merlin II or III, produced around 1,030 horsepower. As the war continued, improvements in supercharging and octane ratings allowed power outputs to escalate well above 1,500 horsepower. Each leap in engine performance demanded adjustments to the Spitfire's airframe, including stronger engine mounts, better cooling systems, and sometimes even extended wingtips to improve high-altitude lift. Eventually, the Spitfire transitioned to the Rolls-Royce Griffon engine in its later marks. The Griffon was larger, heavier, and significantly more powerful than the Merlin, sometimes topping 2,000 horsepower. To accommodate the Griffon's torque, the Spitfire's airframe required further modifications, such as a 5-blade or sometimes even 6-blade propeller. These late-war Spitfires could reach speeds approaching 450 miles an hour, climbing faster and fighting at higher altitudes than ever before. This interplay of airframe and engine upgrades kept the Spitfire relevant well beyond what many believed possible for a design conceived in the 1930s. But seriously, every time that they thought the enemy had a handle on the Spitfire's limits, a new Mark would roll up the production line with improved performance, reminding them that the Spit was a moving target in the arms race of aerial warfare. Few aerial battles loom as large in history as the Battle of Britain. Fought in the skies over southern England from July to October of 1940, this conflict determined whether Nazi Germany's Luftwaffe could wrest air superiority away from the RAF, paving the way for a potential invasion of the British Isles. History would show that the RAF prevailed, and the Spitfire became an undying emblem of British tenacity. During the Battle of Britain, Spitfire squadrons were tasked primarily with engaging the Luftwaffe's fighters. The Hawker Hurricane took on many of the German bombers, while the more agile Spitfire dueled the formidable Messerschmitt Bf-109. The measured outcome hinged on the Spitfire's superior turn rate, climb performance, and synergy with British radar. Pilots were often scrambled at a moment's notice, guided by groundbreaking radar stations that detected incoming raids early. Scrambling from their grass airstrips, Spitfire soared skyward to intercept German formations, relying on their nimble handling to close the distance quickly. This was a game of seconds. Turn a fraction too late, and you risked the Bf-109 crossing your 6. But the Spitfire's elliptical wings gave RAF pilots a turning advantage. They could outturn the 109 in a sustained dogfight. But on the other hand, the Bf-109 was generally faster in a dive and had a strong armament. It was a close matchup, and the skill of the pilot really made all the difference. Still, the Spitfire's presence became a significant morale booster. British citizens and Allied observers around the world took heart in stories of young, daring pilots, many of whom flew the Spitfire, defending their homeland against the odds. Outside the Battle of Britain, the Spitfire proved its mettle in nearly every major theater of World War II. On Malta, surrounded by Axis forces, Spitfires arrived just in time to stave off a blockade. In North Africa, they battled German and Italian fighters in the scorching desert skies. On the Eastern Front, some Spitfires were supplied to the Soviet Union, though their primary domain remained in British and Commonwealth service. The Spitfire excelled in offensive operations too. As the RAF shifted to a more aggressive posture, Spitfires joined sweeps over occupied Europe, escorting bombers and engaging the Luftwaffe on their own turf. Some squadrons even used Spitfires for photo reconnaissance roles, capitalizing on their speed and high-altitude performance to snap critical intelligence photos. The reconnaissance Spitfires often flew unarmed, relying solely on their performance to evade enemy interceptors. Even as the war progressed, the new German fighters like the Focke-Wulf FW-190 emerged. The Spitfire kept pace. Upgraded variants, including the Mark V and later the Mark 9, ensured the RAF's top pilots had a plane capable of matching or beating the latest Axis designs. The Spitfire wasn't just a defensive champion, it transitioned gracefully into the role of an offensive fighter, ground attack platform, and high-altitude interceptor. Ultimately, the Spitfire's role in the Battle of Britain made it a living legend. The mythos of the few in their Spitfires bravely turning back the Luftwaffe became etched into national consciousness. Indeed, the moral victory was as critical as the tactical one. The Spitfire's legacy was forever cemented in those frantic months of 1940, when a slender elliptical wing fighter helped protect a nation from an almost unimaginable fate. Though the Spitfire soared to heroic heights in World War II, it was far from a smooth ride. Wartime conditions demanded rapid adaptations. Early in the war, the RAF discovered that the 303 Browning machine guns lacked the stopping power to down bombers or heavily armored fighters. This led to repeated modifications of the Spitfire's armament setup. Later variants would mount two 20mm cannons complemented by 303 machine guns, offering a more formidable punch. Armament tweaks also necessitated changes to the wings to accommodate bigger cannons, ammo feeds, and recoil systems. Maintaining production was also another huge challenge. Supermarine's facilities in Southampton were vulnerable to German bombing raids, and expansions to meet soaring demand spread manufacturing across multiple locations. This decentralization required intricate logistical coordination, ensuring parts manufactured in one location matched precisely with assemblies built elsewhere. In the heat of war, quality control sometimes suffered, leading to rework and delays. Logistical difficulties extended to frontline operations. Spitfire squadrons, often in remote, hastily prepared airfields, struggle with spare part shortages, fueling constraints, and the harsh realities of fighting in different climates. For instance, the North African desert put a ton of strain on the plane's cooling system and air filtration. Ad hoc modifications, such as Vaux filters, were introduced to combat sand ingestion. Similarly, the tropics demanded specialized gear and modifications to mitigate high humidity and salt corrosion. The Spitfire also faced the challenge of keeping pace with its adversaries. When the Focke-Wulf FW-190 made its debut, many Spitfire Mark V pilots found themselves outgunned and outmaneuvered. The urgent solution was the Mark IX, which essentially involved slotting a more powerful Merlin 61 engine into a Mark V airframe, a transitional fix before the dedicated Mark VIII design was ready. This stopgap proved surprisingly successful, bridging a vital gap until further refinements could enter service. That same pattern, rapid, sometimes improvised upgrades, characterized the Spitfire's evolution. Now, it might have seemed like every time you saw a Spitfire, there was a new tweak or a new mark number, but that willingness to adapt and innovate under pressure was precisely what allowed the Spitfire to remain competitive and relevant from the early days of the war to the very end. The Spitfire family tree is extensive, with over 20 major marks and dozens of subvariants. Each mark represents a snapshot of how the aircraft evolved to meet changing strategic and tactical demands. Early production models like the Mark I and Mark II played starring roles in the Battle of Britain, with around 1,030 horsepower from their Merlin engines. They were able to offer a quantum leap in performance over the older biplanes. The Mark V was a natural progression, benefiting from a more powerful Merlin 45 engine. Its enhanced performance made it the RAF's workhorse in 1941 and 42. However, when the FW-190 arrived on the scene, the Mark V was pushed to its limits. This precipitated the development of the Mark IX, which became one of the most produced variants. The Mark IX's two-stage supercharged Merlin 61 allowed for improved high-altitude capabilities, making it a fearsome competitor to the FW-190 and late-model BF-109s. Meanwhile, the Mark VIII was engineered as a thoroughbred solution with a strengthened airframe, improved fuel capacity, and refined aerodynamics. It excelled in various theaters, from the European front to the Pacific, proving the Spitfire's versatility. Specialized variants also appeared. The Mark VI and VII focused on high-altitude interception, featuring pressurized cockpits and extended wingtips. Reconnaissance variants, such as the PR versions, eschewed armament for extra fuel, cameras, and streamlined airframes, zipping deep into enemy territory to capture valuable intelligence images. Later in the war, the Spitfire stepped up once again with Griffin-powered variants. The Mark XII, the first with the Rolls-Royce Griffin engine, delivered a meaty 1,730 horsepower, enabling top speeds in excess of 400 miles an hour. By the time of the Mark XIV, the Griffin's power soared above 2,000 horsepower, and with a 5-blade propeller, the Spitfire took on a more aggressive look. This iteration could rival the best late-war Luftwaffe fighters. The evolutionary process didn't stop at the end of World War II. Various surplus Spitfires found new life in different roles and countries. Some were refitted as carriers for reconnaissance equipment, while others served as trainers or were sold to foreign air forces. Even after the jet age began, the Spitfire continued to fly in secondary roles or as exhibition pieces in air shows. Each variant is a testament to the Spitfire's design flexibility and the dedication of the engineers who continually pushed the envelope. Performance was the Spitfire's calling card. The earliest Mark I Spitfires boasted a top speed of about 362 miles an hour at 20,000 feet, an astonishing figure at the time. Climb rates hovered around 2,500 feet per minute, letting pilots rapidly ascend to intercept altitude. With a service ceiling near 31,000 feet, the Mark I was well equipped for most missions during the early war days. As developments progressed, the Merlin's engine's incremental power boosts and improved supercharging drastically elevated these numbers. Later Merlin-powered variants like the Mark IX could exceed 400 miles an hour and climb at over 4,000 feet per minute, with service ceilings above 40,000 feet. The Griffin variants upped the ante even further. Some Mark XIVs could hit speeds of around 450 miles an hour, outrunning many late-war adversaries. Range varied widely based on the mission profile and variant. Early Spitfires, geared toward intercept missions, carried around 85 gallons of fuel, limiting them to sorties of just a few hundred miles. Over time, additional fuel tanks were introduced, including slipper tanks, which were mounted under the fuselage for ferry flights. Reconnaissance variants carried extra internal tanks, enabling them to venture deep into enemy territory. Some could manage over 1,200 miles in specialized configurations. Firepower was equally critical. The earliest standard was 8 303 Browning machine guns. And that might sound like a lot of guns, but the 303 round was relatively small. During the Battle of Britain, the loadout was adequate, especially against fighters, but it struggled against heavier bombers. This led to the C-Wing and E-Wing Spitfires, featuring two 20mm Hispano cannons paired with two 303s or 250 caliber Brownings. The 20mm cannons packed a punch, capable of destroying or crippling enemy aircraft with fewer hits. Late war variants consistently carried cannons, some even mounting 4 for maximum destructive power against ground targets and armored airplanes. The Spitfire's handling often gets overshadowed by raw speed and firepower, yet the pilots of the day lauded it. The controls were light but firm, allowing for precise maneuvers. Rolls, loops, climbing turns, the Spitfire excelled in all of them. In dogfights, a well-flown Spitfire could exploit its turning radius and get on an opponent's tail. And thanks to improved sights and stable gun platforms, a quick burst could bring down a foe if your aim was true. Pilots loved how the Spitfire became an extension of themselves, responding almost intuitively to control inputs. In an era where most aircraft demanded constant wrestling with the yoke or stick, flying a Spitfire felt like a revelation. Central to the Spitfire's success story was the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. Known for its melodic growl, the Merlin was the beating heart of Britain's wartime aviation. The engine first ran in the mid-1930s, and by the outbreak of the war, it powered not only the Spitfire, but also the Hawker Hurricane, and later, the Lancaster Bomber. Its relatively small displacement of 1,650 cubic inches belied its power potential. Rolls-Royce engineers recognized early on that supercharging was the key to extracting maximum performance. The Merlin's V12 arrangement and liquid cooling made it lighter than comparable air-cooled radials, granting it a better power-to-weight ratio. Early Merlins produced around 1,000 horsepower, a respectable figure for the late 1930s. But as the war progressed and 100-octane fuel became available, the engineers fine-tuned the Merlin to produce increasingly jaw-dropping outputs, some pushing beyond 1,600 horsepower by the mid-war period. A hallmark of the Merlin was its adaptability. Rolls-Royce's constant improvements led to incremental versions, often designated by Roman numerals, the Merlin 2, 3, 7, 45, 61, and then so forth. Each iteration featured refined supercharging, revised cylinder heads, or better fuel delivery, continually pushing their performance envelope. The two-stage supercharger was a game-changer, enabling high-altitude performance that allowed the Spitfire to engage bombers or fighters operating at altitudes that were once considered unreachable. Merlin reliability was legendary, especially compared to other high-performance piston engines of the era. Yes, maintenance was a bit rigorous and ground crews had their work cut out for them, but the engine rarely left a pilot stranded due to mechanical failure, and it could still limp back home with moderate battle damage. This reliability instilled enormous confidence in pilots, who knew that in a tight dogfight or on a long mission over water, the Merlin was less likely to let them down. When paired with the Spitfire's sleek airframe, the Merlin created an enduring synergy. It's impossible to imagine the Spitfire's iconic status without that engine note. Ask any veteran of those days, or any modern warbird enthusiast, and they'll likely describe the adrenaline rush of hearing a Merlin-powered Spitfire overhead. In many ways, the Merlin engine gave the Spitfire its soul. Now, with the war over, the jet age dawned rapidly. Britain and other major powers transitioned to jet fighters like the Gloucester Meteor and the Havilland Empire. Now, propeller-driven aircraft seemed suddenly antiquated. But still, the RAF did not immediately discard their Spitfire. It served in second-line roles, like training, reconnaissance, and even as a demonstration aircraft for the RAF's display teams. In the immediate post-war years, there were glimmers of commercial opportunity for the Spitfire's proven airframe. Some were converted for photo reconnaissance, surveying territories recovering from conflict, and others continued to protect Britain's skies until they were replaced by jets. By the 1950s, the RAF began systematically retiring Spitfires. Many were scrapped, often heartbreakingly so, as the world moved on from piston engine technology. Yet the Spitfire refused to fade into obscurity. A healthy vintage warbird community emerged, preserving and restoring surviving airframes. Air shows across Britain and beyond would not be complete without the thrilling sight and sound of a Merlin overhead. Multiple Spitfires remain airworthy today, lovingly cared for by passionate owners and museums. Their appearances at aviation events draw crowds of all ages, from World War II veterans reliving precious memories to younger generations enthralled by the plane's classic lines. As the decades rolled on, the Spitfire assumed a new role as a symbol of freedom and resilience. Museums around the world house them as centerpieces, illustrating how technology, ingenuity, and courage shaped historical outcomes. Pilots, historians, and aviation enthusiasts continue to sing its praises, ensuring that the Spitfire's legacy transcends mere machinery to become a living testament to human determination. The Supermarine Spitfire remains one of the most breathtaking examples of aviation ingenuity, embodying the daring spirit of those who designed, built, and flew it. From its first flight in 1936 to modern-day appearances at air shows and museums, the Spitfire continues to capture imaginations worldwide. We hope you found this deep dive into its history, engineering, and service record enlightening and entertaining. But hey, let's be real for a second. The Spitfire story will stand as a testament to human creativity and courage for generations to come. So if you enjoyed this journey or just enjoyed the Spitfire, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss any upcoming explorations into other classic aircraft and the legends that shaped aviation. Safe flying, and thanks for joining the adventure.